Welcome, Kwe, bonjour, hello. On behalf of CIPS, the Center for International Policy Studies at the University of Ottawa, I would like to welcome you and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Anna Bojic, I'm the CIPS coordinator, and today's webinar is entitled Heineken in Africa, Brewing a Better Africa. And that is a question mark. So before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge that the University of Ottawa is located on the unceded Algonquin land. We pay respect to the Algonquin people, who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their longstanding relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region, from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders past, present, and future. So for today's event, we have two guest speakers, and I will let Professor Benjamin Zyla introduce them. Just briefly to remind everybody that we will be recording this event. It will be available on the CIPS YouTube channel in just a couple of days after the event, and we'll be sharing this link shortly with you. I will also be sharing the link to the CIPS website, just for those of you who'd like to also subscribe to our newsletter and learn more about the upcoming events. We'll now give the floor to Professor Benjamin Zyla, who is Associate Professor of International Affairs in the School of International Development and Global Studies at the University of Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, and welcome, a warm welcome also for me to the panelists as well as the audience to this very exciting event on Heineken in Africa. My name is, as Anna said, Benjamin Zyla. I teach in the School of International Development and Global Affairs, and my research is on conflict and conflict-affected states, peace building, and the security development nexus. I also co-direct the Fragile States Research Network here at CIPS with my colleagues Stephen Burani, Ruby Dagger, and Niper Banerjee. I just want to spend a few words on how this sort of idea for this panel came together. It kind of goes back to when I was a visiting scholar at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University from 2019 to 2021, and Olivier approached me whether I would be interested in sort of organizing a panel on such a topic and discuss the book and the implications of the book and so forth. And I was fascinated by the idea and subsequently the book when I had a chance to read it. But then, of course, came the pandemic, and it sort of paused everything for about 2 years now. But we're slowly catching up on things that we wanted to do in the past 2 years. And now today we're very fortunate to have both Olivier and Alain with us today as panelists to discuss what we may perhaps loosely call sort of corporate social responsibility in conflict zones. Olivier, we agreed, will start off our panel with kind of a brief discussion of his book, which, if I understand this correctly, was about 5 to 6 years in the making. And he visited about 12 countries to do the research for this book, which has already been translated in 5 different languages. So as you probably know, for those of you who are drinking beer, Heineken perhaps is known to be one of the most profitable brewers in the world, especially in Africa. And I think Olivier makes this argument, or underlines this argument very compellingly. It's also one of the most popular and widely available beers in Africa today. And it's because of that Heineken is often one of the biggest, not only taxpayers in African countries in which it operates, and thus sort of provides huge benefits, financial benefits to those countries and to balance their budgets and so forth. But also at the same time, it gives this company Heineken a lot of influence over domestic politics in those particular countries, and especially in countries that have weak institutional oversight. So in the book, Olivier describes Heineken's role in Africa very detailed, and also uncovers what some would call sort of questionable practices, as well as genuine dilemmas that are faced by any country, really, that is operating in a poor country. As he notes himself in the book, and I quote here, "Nothing is more fun and more satisfying than being a thorn in the side of Heineken in Africa." As you can tell, he's an investigative journalist who's interested in these kinds of things. He will sort of introduce us to some of those thorny issues, and will elaborate for us on some of those thorny issues. And he will sort of update us also perhaps a little bit about Heineken in Russia, which is his latest research that I understand correctly appeared last week. Following Olivier, Alain Deneault will broaden our perspective a little bit beyond Africa, because naturally the book has sort of a sole focus on Africa, and Alain will widen our perspective and our sort of analytical analysis a bit beyond the African country, and focus on the Total company. He will talk about more in detail about this. Alain is perhaps known to some of you in the Outaouais region, because he was originally born there, if I'm well informed, and he grew up in the region, and he's currently professor of philosophy at the University of Moncton. He studied at the Centre de Marc Bloch in Berlin, and holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Paris 8 in France. Alain has written several books on the ideology of management, as well as on multinational corporations related to energy and mining industries. And some of his books are Offshore, The Rule of Global Crime, Imperial Canada Incorporated, and Legalizing Theft, A Short Guide to Tax Havens. So he will broaden, like I said, our understanding and perspective on large corporations, on corporate responsibility, sort of beyond Africa, and bring it perhaps also back home to Canada. So we look forward to both of your presentations, and again, a very warm welcome from CIPS and myself. And after those presentations, we'll open the floor to the audience for questions and comments. Donc, les deux panélistes parlent anglais et français, donc vous pouvez poser votre question en anglais ou français dans le chat, en bas à votre l'écran. Je pense que c'est disponible pour les écouteurs. Donc, so again, a warm welcome to all of you, and perhaps over to Olivier to start us off. Olivier, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Thank you, Anna, as well, for inviting me through Zoom to this webinar. Heineken in Africa, brewing a better Africa. That's what I'm going to talk to you about for about 15-20 minutes now. So let me first briefly introduce you the company Heineken. It's the world's #2 beer company behind AB InBev, a Belgian Brazilian company. Heineken are based in Amsterdam. It's a convenient 10 minutes bicycle ride away from my home. It's a big company, not as big as Total, where Alain is going to talk about, but it has a revenue of 26.5 billion. And it's interesting to see that in 2021, they were almost back at their pre-pandemic levels already, whereas you would imagine that the alcohol industry was hit heavily throughout the pandemic, but they're almost back at their pre-pandemic levels with a profit of 2 billion as well. It's a truly globalized company. Their biggest markets, while they're very big, for example, in the US, in Italy, in the UK, in France, their current biggest markets are Mexico, Vietnam, and Nigeria. It's not only the Heineken brand that Heineken is selling. They have many different other brands, approximately 300, and a few of the more known ones are Amstel, another Dutch brand, Mexican brands like Sol, Dos Equis, and Tecate. And there's a brand that many people still see as a nice, charming craft beer, Lagunitas. It's also fully owned by Heineken. I think it's always important to note that this is a case study. It is. I don't have anything in particular against Heineken. I'm not the biggest fan of their beer. I think it's a bit watery, but that's not my concern. I think that if you do research on other companies, on other beer companies in Africa, that you will find many similarities, and even if you look at other multinationals operating on the continent, you'll probably also find many similar findings. So Heineken has created a great narrative for Africa. They're great at selling their beer, so they're also great at selling their operations. Marketing is everything to this company. So they claim to be good for development and economic growth because of the jobs they're creating, the value they add to the economy, but they would never mention that their activity also causes a lot of harm, and in the end it actually remains to be seen if it adds more value or whether it destroys more value to those economies. At a very interesting discussion at headquarters with the former human rights manager, he argued that his company is trying to be an island of perfection in a sea of misery. So we will see. Heineken Africa has been very lucrative for Heineken, but the continent is portrayed as a sea of misery because people are poor. They can't buy as many beers as they would buy in the West. There's also logistical problems, there's corruption. So Heineken is this island of perfection that somehow does great business in a sea of misery. They also have the slogans that go with it. Their CSR program is called Brewing a Better World. And a reply to my investigation appeared on their website under the title Growing Together in Africa. Quick look at Heineken's footprint on the continent. They're big in the north as well, predominantly Muslim countries. They do great business, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt. By far the most important market is Nigeria. Then there's a historical presence in Central Africa, in the DR Congo, Rwanda and Burundi. And Southern Africa, and specifically South Africa, is becoming more and more important. People drink they drink more on average than in most other countries because the buying power is quite a bit higher in South Africa. So that's a very important market for Heineken too. Heineken is a commercial success story, you can say. We'll see more about this in the next slide. The importance of Africa. Africa is by many considered as the continent of the future. You've probably heard the Rising Africa narrative that Africa has been, many African countries have been doing a little bit better for the last 20 years. There's been economic growth. So companies who sell products directly to customers, big companies are getting an Africa strategy. But for Heineken, that's not so necessary because they've been there for a very long time. Ever since the end of the 19th century, they've been exporting their beer there. They've had a very long and profitable history. Since the 1930s, they've been brewing locally as well. And if you look at the latest available numbers for Heineken on the African continent, you will see that that Africa's share in the global revenue for Heineken is nearly 15%. The volume, so all the beer sold, is also nearly 15%. But if you look at the profits, they're almost 21%. So this means that for Heineken, for every beer sold, they earn 42% more on average in Africa than globally. And this also goes, I don't know the exact numbers, but for their competitors, it's also very lucrative. One of the reasons is that there is not so much competition on the African continent. So there's relatively high prices. There are still monopolies, duopolies. It's good business for the brewers who are currently working on this continent. And one of the reasons for its success is also that they've really succeeded in being a local company, being perceived as a local company with local brands, Star in Nigeria, Primus in Central Africa. So they're not seen as an intruder. And if you look at a company like Shell or Total, the French company, the petroleum companies, they are often seen as companies that take away and don't give back a lot. But many people in Africa don't even know that Heineken, who operates in Nigeria, for example, under the name Nigerian Breweries, that's the company behind their national beers. Some of the major findings of my research. I first found a lot of what people often say, like classical phenomenons you would expect in Africa. A big fraud case, there's corruption on many different levels, there's tax avoidance, but more shockingly, even more shockingly, I also found corruption with collaboration with dictators. We'll talk about the case of Burundi in a bit. There was sexual abuse of promotion women. We'll get into that as well. Quite a few controversial marketing cases. But first, a quick word on Russia to be fully in the news. Heineken and the war in Ukraine. So many Western companies are called on by the governments to suspend their operations in the Ukraine. Consumers want it as well, in Russia, because they don't want their activity to support the war chest of President Putin. So on the 4th of March, Heineken announced that it would suspend the export and would not invest anymore in Ukraine. They didn't mention that they were hardly exporting anything to Russia, and that at this moment not any company is really seriously investing in Russia. It's the most unstable country in the world. So this is basically a non-measure. They also announced a €1 million gift to humanitarian NGOs in Ukraine. And to put this amount into perspective, €1 million is 0.05% of its net profit in COVID year 2021. And it's also 1/3 of the bonus of the CEO over even worse COVID year 2020, less than 1/3. So it's really next to nothing. So they stepped it up a little bit. On the 9th, they said no more production and sales of the Heineken beer, and we will ring-fence the Russian subsidiary from the mother company, meaning that it would be financially autonomous. How they would do that, they wouldn't tell me. But the thing was, it was very clever statement, because the Heineken beer, stopping the Heineken beer by many was seen as stopping the total production. And here you see a news article on the website of the Wall Street Journal. Heineken closes operations in Russia. Well, Heineken didn't close their operations. They continue to brew more than 35 other brands in Russia. Were still produced and sold, and it was more than 80% business as usual. And there were, I asked Heineken as well how much they were fiscally contributing to Russia, and we're not talking the same amounts as the oil and gas industry, which are a lot more important, but we're still talking about considerable amounts. Heineken wouldn't say its tax contribution for 2021, but they did say that, I found out on the internet that in 2016 they paid nearly 300 million euros, and in 2019 nearly 400 million. So considerable amounts for the Russian state. And I was actually approached by a whistleblower, a European manager from within the company, who pointed to the fact that people internally were also asking, Heineken should really do something seriously and not just stop brewing the Heineken beer. So he told me that this was the case, and I wrote a story about it. And this story appeared Friday, about 10-12 days ago now. And for once, my research, my story had quite direct impact, because 3 days later, Heineken announced to really leave Russia, and of course they would never admit themselves that that one had to do with the other. But also my editors, yeah, we all think that that there was a very clear relationship between the two. Back to Africa.
Mostly they
promotion.
touch you at intimate places like your butt, your boobs, yeah.
They assumed that you were there for, like, you are probably not selling a brand, you're selling yourself.
Most of them, of these girls, they'll have to sleep with manager and customers for them to keep their job.
And that's the whole point, getting them drunk.
And they'll think that you're a whore there because of the dresses, because they're kind of short.
So these are the promotion women. And it's interesting to see that this phenomenon of promotion women promoting beer in bars and clubs and being harassed and intimidated, sometimes worse, has been a problem ever since the early 2000s. First, it caused a scandal in Southeast Asia, mostly in Cambodia and in Vietnam. And after I uncovered these practices in Africa, it was interesting to see that they took almost the same measures as 15 years ago. So no more decent clothing, and bring back those women after work. But once the media attention got down, it was clear that the measures that cost money, that they were abolished again, and the same problem happened. This brings me to probably the most shocking, bizarre moment in my investigation. I also found out that the CEO, he had what he called a consensual love affair with a promotion woman when he was the general manager in Congo. And he admitted to this during the annual shareholder meeting in Amsterdam, and he was then applauded by his shareholders. So that was, it was very strange to see. When I uncovered this in March 2018, Heineken said we will guarantee good working conditions, or else we will stop this activity in the countries where we cannot guarantee those good working conditions. I went to check after their deadline they had imposed to themselves if this was really the case. I went to Kenya, where I shot the video that you've just seen a short fragment of. And it is clear that nothing had changed. They were still doing completely the same thing as before. And then the CEO actually, in an interview, he said, "Me Too is a Western phenomenon. There are cultural differences." So kind of implying that sexual intimidation, harassment, abuse is not as serious in Africa as in the West. And he also said that, well, we don't employ them directly, we use agencies, so the agencies are responsible in the end, we can't control everything. The role of Heineken in Burundi, which is probably the most controversial country in my research. Heineken operates in a joint venture with government in Burundi. So Heineken owns 60% of the shares, government 40%. So 40% of the profits directly go to the government. And in this country, Heineken is so poor, it's the poorest in the world these days by GDP per capita. 10%, Heineken represents 10% of the whole economy of its GDP and more than 30% of the tax revenue. And in my book, I actually argue that Heineken is aware that the tax money is used to pay the civil servants. And those civil servants include the policemen and the soldiers who are committing atrocities against their own people. It's a country that's on the brink of the civil war. There have been 300,000 people that have fled to other countries. There's thousands of people died in recent years. There's torturing taking place. People disappear. So these atrocities are committed by soldiers and by police officers. Heineken is paying their salaries. The Minister of Finance has admitted this to me himself when I interviewed him. So I think you can argue that Heineken has a role in this, like in Russia as well. You see that companies don't want to support the Russian war machine anymore, Vladimir Putin's government. So here it's kind of similar. Heineken is really the stronghold of the government. And let me see, yeah, the role of Heineken in the elections of 2015. Actually, the then president, he's called Pierre Nkurunziza, he wanted a third term, which was unconstitutional. And he wanted to change the constitution, couldn't do that despite this authoritarian regime. So he decided that it was up to the Constitutional Court to rule whether he could run for a third term or not. And not all the judges were in favor, so they were within the Constitutional Court, so they were offered positions and bribes. And the chairman of the Constitutional Court actually was offered a position at the board of Heineken. So in the end, the Constitutional Court took the decision that Nkurunziza could run for a third term. And then the chairman of the Constitutional Court was promoted to be the chairman of the board of Heineken. So you had a strange position for 5 years that's one of the most important judges of the country was also at the same time the chairman of the board of Heineken in Burundi. So formerly the number one of Heineken Burundi. Few controversial marketing examples. First, this is a school in Nigeria where Heineken has a charity program, and well, they painted the wall a little bit, but they didn't even do the foundation, as you can see. It was very, it was not much. But as soon as these young kids can read, they know that they're going to school thanks to a beer company. Heineken often sees, they don't have many competitors in most African countries, so they see traditional drinks as serious competition. So in Nigeria, they organize beer and health conferences. And they actually say that drinking their Heineken beer is better for your health. It's more stable. The quality of local beers can change from one day to another. So they actually, during a conference, they organize it at a luxurious hotel in the area. They will say that there will be academics and pseudo-academics who will tell an audience of businessmen, of influencers, that moderate consumption will prevent many diseases, that you will live longer drinking beer, you will be more beautiful, it's part of a healthy lifestyle. And they actually recommend you, I'll skip the video, they recommend you to take 1.5 liters per day, 2.5 bottles. And the Nigerian bottles are really big, so 1.5 liters per day to benefit from all the advantages of beer for your health. To finish, it was good to see that the book had some impact, that it changed mentalities, and one of the examples that I like is a former human rights manager for Heineken, not the same one as who said that the island of perfection is a sea of misery, but his predecessor. She actually said on a show, on a special broadcast program on David Graeber and his bullshit jobs, that the bullshit jobs is the thesis that's about 10 to 20% of people working in big organizations, government organizations or corporate organizations have bullshit jobs. They're busy the whole day, but in the end, if they think what they're doing, it's actually nonsense. It's meaningless in a way. And she concludes that working as a human rights manager for Heineken is actually a bullshit job. It means that it was important that her position was there, that she was doing things, but when she wanted to improve human rights, she was held back. That was not the point. The point was that she had to be there had to be a human rights policy in place, but the content of it didn't matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olivier. This is fascinating, and I already have a number of questions. And this is just a sort of reminder to the audience to perhaps use the question and answer tab. We're starting to collect some of your questions and comments, which we can then forward to the panelists after their talk. So without further ado, Alain, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here among you, and I'm very pleased to share this event with Olivier. We do work on similar issues. I work myself on multinational corporations, Canadian mining corporations, or Total, among other continents about Africa, and we are both published in France by the same publisher, Rue de l'Échiquier. Well, I also worked on a specific case study, which is the energy company Total, which is mainly related or known for its activities in the oil business. And actually, I worked on Total because it's the most important corporation in the Francophone countries, among countries where French is being spoken. Total is the most important corporations, and there was in French no exhaustive work at all on this major company. It's astonishing. And I also was interested in the fact that this company, Total, which is the result of the merging of three specific corporations in year 2000, that Total gave itself that name in 1953, when one of its historical components, the Compagnie Française de Pétrole, decided to give itself a label which was Total, and that a major corporation dedicated to energy decided to name itself Total when Hannah Arendt was written her book about totalitarianism. I found it very interesting on a ideological point of view, and the idea for the Compagnie Française de Pétrole, former Total Corporation, that gave itself the brand Total, was to say, hey, we're not just a small French corporation. We are as important as the Seven Sisters. We are as important as the Standard Oil, the Esso, Chevron, well, Texaco at that time, or Shell or BP. We are also involved in a totalitarian way in energy. And it was sort of a claim that we are also dedicated to a total control of the energy market. And so I worked on that a lot. I won't have time here to explain all the genesis of Total, but I can recall that actually the company was created in illegality. Before the First World War, there was a plot between a few corporations to create a cartel in the oil industry, because the corporations involved in that business understood that there was no interest in fighting one against the other to control the oil industry, but that it was more relevant for them to control the whole market while sharing it throughout cartels. So in 1914 was created the Turkish Petroleum Company by BP, Shell, and the Deutsche Bank. And after the First World War, in the spirit of the Versailles Treaty, the German shares of that cartel were given to France. And the US also took part of that cartel that became the Iraq Petroleum Company, which was sort of a private parliament of the oil industry in the Middle East. And it was about controlling the oil business. And while France was the smaller player in that cartel, they didn't have it came too fast for them. They didn't have the skills to compete or to deal with Americans or British in that specific field. So fun was made out of them, like the CFP, the Compagnie Française de Pétrole, that France finally created illegally to take part at that cartel. I say illegally because the parliament was never consulted, even though the constitution said it had to be. Well, France in that cartel, the CFP that was created so that France could take part of that cartel was presented by British and Americans not as a Compagnie Française de Pétrole, but as people that say can't find petroleum. I mean, they were the one that wouldn't be, would find it difficult to follow the movement. Why was it a cartel? Because they signed agreement about controlling the market. Two important agreements, the Red Line Agreement and the As-Is Agreement, about the control of the oil made available on the market and the control on sharing every discoveries that were made in the oil business, especially in the Middle East. So it was sort of a sovereign power that was created with the approbation of several states, the US government, the British government, the Dutch government, and also the French government. They were actually admitting and approving the existence of a cartel in the Middle East related to the oil industry, even though that cartel wouldn't have been legal on their own territory. But in that perspective, they supported it because it was a way for them between the two world wars to make sure they would have access to oil, which was a strategic commodity at that moment. Especially at that moment. I mean, people in France remember the Verdun War, where they almost was a lack of oil, and that could have been a loss for them. So I would say in the psychoanalytic perspective that the original scene of Total was occurred in illegality, and it's quite telling. But I won't talk that much about Total, only to say that when we study corporations, major corporations, multinational corporations, we kind of discover not only the corporations we're studying. It can be Monsanto, it can be Heineken, it can be Total, it can be Microsoft, McDonald's. The question is, when you study a multinational corporations, you kind of discover that in our culture, we know little about these structures. We know little about corporations, about worldwide corporations, about multinationals. And our notions, our basic notions, our basic political concepts that we use on a daily basis to think politics are not relevant to consider the power and the importance of major multinational corporations. We don't have the skills or the common notions to talk about them properly. For instance, Total could be introduced as a French oil company. Well, in my work, I tried to demonstrate that these four words aren't properly used. If you say Total is a French oil company, you're doing 4 mistakes using these 4 words, because right away, the singular of a company is not adequate, because in our according to the business legal systems worldwide, Total isn't a company. Well, actually, Total doesn't even exist as a company. What exists is a network of companies. That's why we say a group or an empire sometimes. Total is more like a network of structures, independent one to another, created according to the law of the state where a subsidiary may be created, or a small bank or trust, or whatever the status is. And if you take Total, it's not a company, it's more than 1,000 structures related and coordinated by a board of administrators. But it isn't at all in our legal system, it isn't at all a company. As such, Total doesn't exist more than Santa Claus. And it's true for every corporation. And that's why it's so easy for them, for instance, to practice tax avoidance. Because since the components of the group are legally independent one to another, they may, from a subsidiary located in a tax haven, send invoices related to property rights or to let's say property rights related to the use of a logo or of a brand. So the group is able to manage all its structures so that the one that is located in Bermuda sent invoices to all the others for the use of the brand of the corporation, so that each year every component of the group sent money to that subsidiary in the Bermudas, where they pay no tax, to avoid taxation wherever they actually evolve. So a multinational corporation isn't a corporation. It's a network of corporations doing forum shopping, using jurisdictions with respect to their interests. So that's why they will always claim, when you hear the CEOs or the presidents of these corporations, they will always claim that they work in a legal way. They will say, we fully respect the tax laws of the Bermudas. We respect all the laws on human rights in Myanmar. We respect all the environmental laws in Alberta. We respect all laws. We respected all laws on human rights during the apartheid in South Africa, and so on and so forth. They always claim to respect the law. Well, actually, what they mean is that their subsidiary in a specific country will respect the law of this country, even though the country, the jurisdiction we're talking about, doesn't have a serious legal system. So this is the first problem. If we don't understand multinational corporations, if we don't understand that they exist on every side of a border. The second aspect is about saying that the company is an oil company. More or less, nowadays, multinational corporations are involved in a lot of fields. General Electric is not only doing the device we know, it's a bank. For a long time, it was a major bank related to investment. Well, it's the same with Total. Total is involved nowadays in the gas industry, but also in electricity, batteries, the wind energy, the sun energy, and also all kind of fields related to artificial intelligence, investment. And in France, and especially, but also in Africa and in Europe, Total is being often like a state within the state, having a lot of money budgets to invest in social affairs, in sports, in culture, in tourism. So they aren't only related to a field, and it's a problem to see corporations as having now only a sort of a vocation somehow in a specific domain. So it's not a company, and these corporations often don't have really a nationality. So it's an error to say that Total is a French company. When you look at the shareholders, since the 1980s, Total was privatized by the French government. There's several historical components. And nowadays, the French government has almost nothing in the corporation, less than the Qatari government or the Chinese government. There's no reference shareholders, but the most important shareholder is an American investors that we know quite well, BlackRock of Larry Fink. Previously, it was a tandem formed by the Canadian Desmarais, the Canadians Desmarais and the Belgians Frères. They all together, they invested in Total a lot, and they were members of the board. And it's, when you look at the shareholders, we see that it's right at the beginning, fundamentally an international or apatrid company, but it has nothing to do with France. And this is only about folklore. It's folklorish to say that it's a French company. It's a company that is dedicated to shareholders that you can find in Sweden, in the UK, in South Africa, in Australia, and in several tax havens. So it's not really a French company. It's not really a company. It's not a company. It's a network of structures dedicated to the interests of their shareholders. And it's not really a company in a way also that a company could be seen only as being involved in industrial processes. A company is defined in terms of being involved in an industry, a field where you have skills, you have clients, you have you sell goods, and the idea of growth and being a multinational corporation is the idea of being a private sovereignty. And there's something political related to the status of a multinational corporation. A corporation is not only about selling goods, or producing goods. It's about being powerful as a specific type of sovereignty that is able to interfere with the traditional sovereignties, which are states. So the corporation, and I will conclude here, the corporation nowadays, a multinational corporation, is able to do what Patrick Pouyanné, the president of Total, called geopolitik. He says, we don't do politics at Total, we do geopolitics. So we're able to play a diplomatic role and a political role worldwide to set up the rules of globalization, the legal rules of globalization. So we don't care about who will win that or this election, who will have the crown of that specific state. What we do want to decide is what will be the framework in which states will have to compete so that they will have to seduce our subsidiaries on a tax point of view, and also on a legal point of view. That will be it for now.
Thank you very much, Alain. And this was fascinating. And perhaps I'll give you a second to catch your breath. Let me remind the audience to post their questions en anglais ou français in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Some of your questions have already come in. So perhaps let me sort of kickstart a discussion with perhaps a first question to Olivier. And that is, so in 1994, a plane, as we probably know, a plane was carrying the president of Rwanda and his Burundian counterpart. And that plane was shot down close to Kigali, the Rwandan capital. Now, what has happened following that incident is, of course, the Rwandan genocide, in which close to about a million people or so were killed. Now, what I find, in a way, a bit of a macabre footnote in your book to that tragic history, as you describe it, is that namely both former presidents ended up in Heineken's freezes, essentially. Tell us more about that.
Specifically, the president of Rwanda ended up, they both ended up in you're right, in cold rooms of a brewery. It also showed that those countries in those days were even more underdeveloped than now. There were hardly any other cold rooms around, so that was part of it. But it also showed, specifically in Rwanda, how close the brewery was to government. They, like in current Burundi, the government was shareholder of the beer company, and I also argue in my book that Heineken might have been indirectly complicit to the genocides. And of course, I'm not saying that because of Heineken the killings took place or more people died. But what I have observed is that Heineken knew they had a very good Africa regional director. They knew that their beer was being used by the killers to motivate them and to reward them after a day of killing. And beer in those days was a very, even more than now, it was an aspirational product. People would only take one beer on a Sunday. And then all of a sudden, beer was available all the time. Sorry. And actually, there have been witness reports that that beer was really, it played a very important role for during those days for the killers. And Heineken, they now claim that their company, that their Rwandese brewery, had become autonomous. That it was not their company. Sorry. My voice. It was not their company. I'll take some water and.
We'll come back to you, Olivier, once you had a chance to grab some water. What I find fascinating in both of your works is that there seem to be 3 or 4 keywords coming back and forth, so to speak. So perhaps you could elaborate on, perhaps give us some examples on some of those key issues. a little bit more detail in terms of, both of your works talks about tax evasions. So multinational corporations trying to avoid paying taxes in sort of host countries, or even beyond that. There's talk about bribery, and there's talk about fraud, there's talk about corruption. Can you, both of you, give us perhaps a little bit more sort of info details on this? Perhaps we start with Alain, and then come back to Olivier, perhaps to finish off the Rwandan discussion, and then perhaps you can come in on that question as well. Alain.
Well, when you consider that multinational corporations are fundamentally a network of subsidiaries independent one to another, that means that they can send to each other invoices, they can borrow money, they can even bring the other subsidiary to court if they become crazy. I mean, everything is possible in that context, in that global context that is being allowed by the law, the business laws that look alike in these different states. So that means that if you have anemic states on, let's say, fiscal issues like Luxembourg, Switzerland, the Bahamas, the Barbados, there are 80 of them. It means that, of course, a corporation, and this is what will be taught in business schools that are funded by public spending. This is the paradox. Of course, multinational corporations will artificially send assets, profits in these subsidiaries that pay no tax or almost no taxes on their profits, then paying taxes in the country where they are currently working and active. But it's only the pit of the iceberg, because what is true with respect to taxation is also true for almost every aspect of an industrial company or a financial company. What is true about fiscality, taxation, is also true about human rights. We cannot hire children in Canada, but it's easy to create a subsidiary and a factory in Bangladesh or in China where actually children will work for you. You cannot pollute as you may or as you want when you register a ship in the US, in France, or in Canada. But if you register your ship in Panama or in Liberia, you will be able to pollute as much as you want. You won't have any kind of constraint. And it's true about merging companies, about hiding debts in the accountability of a company. You have a lot of countries that allow you to do what would be forbidden in your own state. And it's not only about taxation, it's about forum shopping. You're a company that has subsidiaries in 100 countries, in 130 countries, like Total. You have the choice. So that's why Total is closing a lot of factories in France to open some others in Saudi Arabia, because you don't find the same social system in Saudi Arabia than in France. So and since in this ideology, the only thing that matters is profit, well, environment is considered as a cost. Taxes are considered only as a cost. Wages are considered as a cost. And the idea is to lower these costs wherever you can. So you go in countries where laws are weak, where governments are weak or corrupted. And it includes Canada, by the way, for some purposes. And then you have all the advantages you want. And you can always play the countries one against the other, because the difference between a multinational corporation and a state state is that a multinational corporation is sovereign worldwide because it has no border. It can evolve everywhere, where a state has only a sovereignty on the territory on which it has prerogatives. So no state can vote laws about what a multinational can do or not worldwide. It's only about their own territory. So you have, because of that different of scale, you have a relationship that is on the advantage of multinational corporations.
Yeah, my voice is back. Great. Yeah, it is of course a very sensitive topic. Yeah, what I found out is that after I also spoke to Heineken about what happened. Yeah, about what I found out during the genocide, that they continued to brew even though they knew that that it was so important. They actually came up with a new narrative, in a sense, with a new story that that they had lost control over the brewery. So it was a Heineken brewery brewing Heineken brands, namely Primus primarily, the local brand. And it was still, they actually changed the drivers. There were no more Tutsi drivers. The Tutsi was the ethnicity that was killed during the genocides by the Hutu power, the Hutus who were in power. It was more complicated than that, but that was essentially what was happening. So Heineken claimed this is not our company anymore. The expats managers were sent away on the other side of the border. The Burundi's brewery is very close to the border with the current DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, which was then called Zaire. They were actually they were located at, maybe as the crowd flies, 10 kilometers to 20 kilometers max from the brewery. And there was daily contact between the managers and between the direction and the engineers, the one who made the brewery still run. It was quite complicated to run a brewery in those days. So it was very clear that Heineken was still in charge, and they even made money during that time. During those 3 months of killings in Rwanda, they continued to be profitable. They've actually admitted that recently as well. But they said, no, this is not Heineken anymore. I guess that's kind of the same that they announced when they were talking about ring fencing the company in Russia. What it really means, to whom the money goes, then the profits, I don't know, but they don't want to answer that. But to me, it was very clear that Heineken has stayed during the genocide and continued to make money in a very cynical way. The other question, to go on a little bit on what Alain has said, I noticed as well that Heineken claims to have values and they have a code of conduct, but what you see when you look into their African operations, that their values and it's very flexible. You know, it shows the fact that in Africa you have less legislation. Often you don't really have a critical press. You don't have NGOs as watchdogs. If there are laws, they are not being enforced. Sometimes politicians are individual shareholders of the beer company as well. So you don't have a mechanism with checks and balances in place. And then you see that a company that wouldn't allow itself to do things like you're saying as well, Alain, in the West, they will do them they will do those things to make more profits, like putting your logo on a school, for example. They will allow themselves to do that in those African countries. And to me, one of my analyses is also that it shows that we shouldn't allow companies to regulate themselves. They often make pleas for self-regulation, we have the same interests as you have, and many politicians like those kind of claims. They give them a lot of freedom in that. They think that business interest and general public interest can be the same. But from my research, I think that governments really should clearly set the rules, the frameworks, and enforce those rules, and not to leave them up to businesses to decide that themselves.
This is actually a nice segue into a question that Elizabeth Michel initially posed to Alain, but I think Olivier, it also applies to you and your case study on Heineken. Elizabeth asks, could multinational corporations be democratic, in quotation marks, or being engaged for human rights? Alain, do you want to start us off? And then perhaps Olivier.
Well,
so I think the bigger question, I think the bigger question behind it is, you know, what can we do about it? Seeing these deficiencies in the sort of governance system or in global governance per se.
Well, this is the way I work in my book, and I will say two things. That on one hand, we may practice here critical thinking and say things as they are, even though it doesn't bring us to a direct solution. And if we see things as they are, I will say without any without detour that the problem of multinational companies is multinational companies. They are the problem. The problem is not about how you can control them, change them. They are the problem. I mean, if you're a bit democratic, if you believe a bit in democracy, you cannot concede that so many interests are being concentrated in so few hands throughout multinational corporations, and that so few companies may have a say, may control everything that is related to agriculture, to culture, to energy. I mean, it's undemocratic. And so, but if you look at things on a more a pragmatic way, what we may see in the last years is a change in the mindset. I mean, people are being more aware about what multinational corporations are. They see them as a whole, even though legally they aren't a sole subject of law. It was easy for Total in the middle of the 20th century to say, as Olivier said for Heineken, oh, in South Africa, our subsidiary became totally crazy. We don't have anything to do with it. It's only an independent structure. It has the name Total, but we don't control it anymore. They do whatever they want, but the money was shared. I mean, the capital was the same and the shareholders were the same, but it was easy to do that. But now it isn't anymore. I mean, in Myanmar, France had to withdraw. They had to come back. They had to leave because people know that even though you'll say the opposite, there are structural relationships between a headquarter of a company and its a subsidiary. One small short word about ethic. In business ethic, there's a premise saying ethic is good for business. They will also always say that. Ethicians are companies. Ethic is good for business. It created a good relationship with your customers, with your employees, with your partners. It's good for business. And what does it mean? It means that there's ethic only when it's good for business. And when is it good for business is when the public is aware of something. So if the public is aware of something going on in Russia and Ukraine, you have to become ethic because it's good for business if you're ethic in that type of context. But if people do not care because they aren't informed, because they don't have time to be aware of certain topics or to be involved or to, if they're well, then you don't have to be ethic, because you have to be ethic only when it's good for business. And it's really how things are being managed in corporations.
Yeah, my answer would be that yeah, it's kind of by definition that multinationals are not democratic. It's in the end mostly the shareholders who have the last words. And it's those are maybe getting a little bit more ethically aware. There's a sort of an awareness that companies need to step up, but in the end, especially with a company like Heineken, when you see that the shareholders are applauding the CEO when he admits to having an affair with a promotion woman, I don't see the activist shareholders really changing a company. And of course, they are not elected either. They are there because they have money. I do think, however, that there are a lot of people with good intentions within companies, and they sincerely think they can change things. I think this former human rights manager is an example of that as well. And Heineken has been very good at convincing its own people as well that they're brewing a better world, and many of them believe it. They believe that they have a nice job. It's adventurous. You go to adventurous countries. You make good money. You have good stories. You drink your beer now and then. But in the end, so the story is great. The conditions are great. But in the end, you have those targets that you have to fulfill, and they are often not aligned with creating a better world or creating improving human rights conditions. And I think up until now, in the end, yeah, the targets, which are mostly financial, they will always win, and they are the more important. And you have this triple P narrative in the business world. It's about profits, but also about people and the planet. I think in the end, it's still the profits that's by far the most important, and then will always it's the very reason for a company. And there's, in a sense, there's of course nothing wrong with making money, but the fact that you have this whole story around it, with we're also doing good for the planet and the people. Yeah, I haven't seen that with Heineken.
Thanks, Olivier. And Alain, perhaps a follow-on question from an anonymous attendee in French. I think you can see this in the question and answer section. So this person essentially asks, how do you sort of force multinational corporations to pay their taxes, but at the same time sort of without increasing their power over the country that they're based in? And the case study would be Burundi, but I would imagine it would go beyond that.
Yeah, it's a difficult issue. It's also quite ironic that often companies people are angry at them because they don't pay their taxes. And now in Burundi, they do pay their taxes, but then they also get criticized because the taxes are used for the wrong thing. So I see there's a sort of certain irony there. But the thing is that I think if at one point, yeah, you're paying a tax, paying your taxes there doesn't give you the position to change policy. And I mean, I don't think that Heineken has really been able to influence Burundian politics and to avoid atrocities being committed by the people who are paid with their money. So, for me, Heineken should and other companies should ask themselves at one point a serious question: the consequences of my presence at a country, can I live with those, you know? And now in Russia, you see that companies are seriously leaving, but that's not because, in my view, because they have ethical problems with it. It's because it's reputation management, it's risk management. They see that the reputation is being, it can be very bad for their reputation to stay at this point. What I don't see, I'm not saying that Heineken should leave Africa or should leave Burundi or other countries. What I see is that Heineken never seriously asks itself those questions. It never makes a balance. Okay, what are the advantages of staying? What are the disadvantages? It looks for arguments for a decision that it's already taken. And normally that decision is we stay until it's really not possible to do so because our reputation would be damaged by it. And often what I find very cynical is they often use their employees as a reason to stay. We care so much about our employees, so we can't leave them in these difficult times. But what I've seen, for example, in Congo is that they can also use employees, they can also lay off a lot of employees because of a war. So that happened at the turn of the century in Congo. They laid off hundreds of workers because of economical reasons. They also they used the pandemic to make a round of mass layoffs. They cut 8,000 jobs. So if you hear a company during a crisis saying, no, we can't change anything because of our employees, yeah, I don't really believe them. To me, that's opportunistic.
Well, if I may add something, well, there are three types of problem here. One is when in a country, when the source of taxation is constituted by companies that concentrate a lot of assets, well, it makes the government weak, because it means that you depend on a few businesses. It's so easy to understand that in Canada, for instance, in Alberta or in New Brunswick, well, you have a bunch of companies that that the government depend to. But mainly, there are two ways to fight against tax avoidance and evasion. And one thing would be to consider, and governments can do that, consider multinational corporations as being a sole company, a legal subject, and then to tax throughout the method, tax multinational corporations with respect to the profit they owe to their presence in your land. I mean, if Coca-Cola or Monsanto or Microsoft or Disney owes 4 or 5% of its business to Canada, well, they will be taxed on that percentage. And that can be established throughout notions like capital, number of employees, and all kind of data. It wouldn't be that complicated. So you can say, well, your 4, 5, 6% of your profits are related to your activities in Canada, so we'll tax you on that percentage, even though the money may be nowadays in Luxembourg or in the Panama or elsewhere. And so it would be a technical way to tackle tax havens, so they would be useless. But the countries have to fight for that. But if you have at the Department of Finance, like in Canada, always someone from Bay Street that belongs to the social class that benefit from tax havens, it won't happen. And the third consideration we can have on tax avoidance, it's diplomacy. When a state like the Bahamas vote a law that allows investors to create an exempted company, it is written in that law that the exempted company may be created and benefit from tax avoidance only if they have no activities on the territory of the country. So they have to be nowhere. Because if you sell fishes on the street, you'll have to pay taxes. So you have to be nowhere. So what does it mean? It means that tax havens are creating laws that are voting laws that create a buffer between countries, because the assets that a corporation registered in such company isn't related to what is happening in the Bahamas. But the Canadian government, for instance, cannot ask anything about that because it's not related to their jurisdiction anymore. So we could say that tax havens are guilty of political interference, because they vote law on the way capital will be managed everywhere in the world except in their own country. So their law is applied on activities that occur abroad. And on a diplomatic way, countries could fight these laws, say to the Panama, to the Bahamas, to the Barbados, to these laws that you're voting are laws that are related to activities that occur on our territory. So it's a type of political interference, and there are ways to tackle that, but you have to consider that the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister or the President of your country is concerned by this issue, and not only the Minister of Revenue like we do in Canada. It's not a technical issue.
I think we have perhaps time for one or maximum two questions. Just a reminder to the audience to pose your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen there, please. This is a question from Zahir to Olivier. Was there a gender dimension to Heineken investments in Africa? For example, the number of women workers employed, or in the backward linkages to the economy?
Yeah, I think that especially in Africa, but also in the West, the beer industry is often still a very masculine environment. What you see is that Heineken does some efforts to get more women. A few years ago, they appointed a woman in the board for the very first time. The CFO was a woman for a few years. They did try to get rid of their reputation of being a bit of a Dutch old boys network, with some success. You also see that, and this is also goes for Africa, that women represent a very large untapped potential for their products. So they have light beers now as well that are often marketed for women. You have Radler beers with a bit of lime or with a bit of sweet juice in it that are there is a gender dimension, definitely, and I think employing more women could actually, for example, the whole scandal of the promotion women, that's having more women in your company and in high positions, could help to take those things more seriously than just be an old boys network company, and it could lead to more, better decisions, more sensible, decision making.
There's also a question from Victoria Shore, or I think it's directed to Olivier, but I think Alain, you may want to add a few comments there as well. The question is, are there other countries where Heineken is doing similar government military payments as they're doing in Burundi? she's looking for answers in contemporary times, not in the past. And perhaps for Alain, does the same apply perhaps to Total, and where would this be?
Yeah, for Heineken, well, Russia is a good example where, well, their payments were considered as being support for the government. There's also, again, the case of Myanmar. Myanmar was one of the few countries that Heineken, I think maybe even the only one that Heineken left in '96 because of the civil war, the junta having taken over there. And now, as we know, yeah, the situation is bad again. The mass killings of the Muslim minority there, and Heineken is under pressure to, yeah, doing business in this country is seen as very bad again, and some people put Heineken under pressure to be more serious about this. But I don't have the details about this. But those are the two countries that come to mind.
Well, I will quote the same countries. I mean, Total remained in Russia, remains in Russia, even though there's the war and a lot of public pressure. And in Myanmar, Total left thanks to a lot of political pressure from the public. But for years, Total allowed not only the state to earn money from taxes, but also with that capital to borrow money on the markets so that they could finance their budget. Without Total, maybe the military power in Myanmar wouldn't have lasted. I would also add that oil companies created in the 20th century countries as such. I mean, Iraq was created by the British to support this cartel I talked about at the beginning. And the Frenchmen were a bit angry to see how powerful the British and the Americans were in the Middle East. And that's why they in a way, used that model to shape their own African empire. So Gabon, Congo, Brazzaville, the Chad, and a few other countries were shaped exactly in the way the British organized this mantle of the Ottoman Empire. So they created sort of legal envelopes to support the oil industry, and they not only supported these countries, they created them.
Unfortunately, I think this brings us to the end. I'm just looking at my clock. We're out of time. This is a very fascinating topic, and I want to thank Olivier and Alain for being on the panel and sharing your research with us. I would also like to thank, of course, the audience for being here and for raising those important questions. And last but not least, of course, a big thank you to both Anna and Andrew for your administrative and technical support. This wouldn't have been possible without you. And with that, I close the panel and perhaps turn it over to Anna, if you want to say a couple last words.
Thank you to everybody. I just wanted to add, just to let our audiences know that we have another webinar tomorrow. And you can check out on our website. It is entitled A Conversation with Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. And we'll be welcoming Mr. John Sobko and Professor Daryl Copeland tomorrow from 11 a.m. And I will share this very quickly with you. And of course, we have another webinar. It will not be a webinar, it will be an in-person roundtable happening on Friday, April 22nd from 2:30 till 4:30 here on campus in the FSS building. So I will also very quickly share that with you, and you'll be receiving that in the newsletter. So once again, thank you everybody, and do follow up on the events and news of CIPS. Thank you.